When you first hear the name Chrystul D. Kizer, it signifies a young black girl from Kenosha, Wisconsin, and how brutality, survival, law, and justice would define her life. She was 17 years old when she walked into a street in Kenosha in June of 2018 and walked back out holding a gun, stepping into a chain of events that would quickly escalate into legal precedent and fierce debate over the nature of victimhood in the American criminal justice system. It was a story of exploitation and the haunting ways in which violence can shape the life of a child who should never have been alone in the world in the first place. Chrystul has been surrounded by abuse her entire life. Her mom, Devor Taylor, was 16 when she had Chrystul. Taylor took jobs at fast food joints to support her daughter, a burgeoning artist. Chrystul was delighted by watching cartoons and even more entertained by drawing worlds of her own. Devor Taylor was in a domestically violent relationship, and the kids were also subjected to it. Chrystul learned to guide her siblings to their bedrooms while they had to wait for the police to arrive at such a young age. In 2015, they moved from Indiana to Milwaukee, where they had to stay at a Salvation Army shelter for months before affording a place. Chrystul and her brother started to act out more. She was skipping school while her brother was selling cars. During this time, she formed a relationship with Delane Nelson. When she was in junior high, she earned a spot in Gary's Performing Arts Academy. She also tried to play the violin and chose orchestra as her specialty. Taylor couldn't afford a violin. By then, she had 3 more children and a boyfriend to support, so she put $100 down and paid a little at a time. While Taylor took classes at night, Chrystul started practicing at all hours, trying to learn Beethoven and Silent Night. Chrystul describes herself by talking about her music. "I'm a violinist," she said. "For some instruments like the guitar, my hand is too little for the board, so I like instruments that I can play." But while she learned the violin, Chrystul's childhood started to unravel as her mom's boyfriend turned more and more violent. Taylor never thought he would hurt her kids. Chrystul remembered differently. "We would get in trouble and he would take it too far and do extra," she said. Chrystul learned to guide her brother and 2 sisters into their bedroom, close the door, and wait for her mom to say she could call the police. They would just take him and tell him to leave, Chrystul recalled, but he would always come back. At the end of 2015, Taylor and the kids left almost all of their belongings in Indiana and moved to Milwaukee. They stayed at a Salvation Army shelter for months before they found an apartment. While Taylor was working at Denny's, her son started stealing cars. Chrystul started skipping school and hanging with Delane Nelson, who was 3 years older than her. Soon, Chrystul and Nelson were physically fighting. Once, a witness saw Nelson holding Chrystul in a headlock and striking her with a stick more than 10 times while dragging her through the parking lot. Nelson, who did not respond to requests for comment, pleaded guilty to a charge of battery. Chrystul stayed with him. Chrystul had grown up carrying wounds that most adults would struggle to contain. Her early years were marked by instability. In 2016, driven by needs that far exceeded what a teenage girl should ever have to shoulder alone, she placed an advertisement on Backpage.com, which is now a defunct classified website that was, for years, a conduit for sex trafficking and exploitation of minors under the guise of paid escort ads. That is where she met Randall Phillip Volar III, a 34-year-old white man from Kenosha. He was wealthy enough to own a nice house and a luxury vehicle. He would later be accused by law enforcement of sexually abusing and trafficking Chrystul and other underage girls, leveraging money, drugs, and coercion to draw them deep into a cycle of exploitation. Yet despite evidence that police had seized from Volar's home, including videotapes showing him abusing underage girls as young as 13 and 14, no substantial action was taken to bring him to justice on charges of child sex trafficking. He was instead released, allowed to remain free on bail, and to continue the pattern of abuse unimpeded. In February of 2018, a 15-year-old girl called police from inside Volar's house, telling them he had drugged her, that she was incapacitated, and that he intended to kill her. When officers finally entered, they found a child wandering half-naked on the street, disoriented, and under the influence of hard drugs. Investigators later found stacks of recordings, hundreds of videotapes, showing underage girls, including Chrystul, being sexually abused, some of them clearly coerced and traumatized beyond measure. Yet when prosecutors reviewed the evidence, the case languished. Months went by while this man accused of child sex trafficking walked free. Just 12 days after the prosecutor's office finally submitted the charges, still without bail, he would be dead. On June 5, 2018, 17-year-old Chrystul showed up at Volar's house, armed with a handgun. Witnesses say she shot him twice in the head. Then, as flames began to consume the home, she fled in his BMW. Just after 5 a.m., a woman looked out the window of her Kenosha home and spotted flames on the roof of the tiny tan ranch house on the corner. She punched 911 into her phone. Law enforcement arrived to find Volar's body in the burning house. A badly charred body lay slumped on the ground. There were 2 gunshot wounds in the head. Police combed the house for evidence. Alcohol bottles on the floor, a pizza box in the fridge, multiple hotel room keys. Credit card records showed that the night before, he paid for an Uber from Milwaukee to his home. The Uber driver told police he had given a ride to a short black girl named Chrystul. Neighbors reported that there was usually a BMW in Volar's driveway. The car was found abandoned in Milwaukee. A receipt inside led police to a Family Dollar store, where security footage revealed that 4 teens had driven the BMW. One of them said he had a sister named Chrystul Kizer. Police found her Facebook page, filled with photos of a slender girl who wore long, colorful wigs. On the night of the fire, she posted a selfie at 3 to 10 a.m. Behind her were curtains detectives recognized from Volar's house. The caption, "My mugshot." 3 days later, Chrystul live-streamed on Facebook. She talked about giving her brother a BMW. She showed off a gun. She told her 20-year-old boyfriend, Delane Nelson, "I don't want to shoot anybody else." The next morning, police drove a battering ram into Nelson's front door. They found Chrystul inside, a shower cap on her head. Zip ties were placed around her wrists as she was escorted into a squad car. She was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional homicide, along with arson, car theft, and other crimes that seemed designed to paint her as a violent criminal with no redeeming context. The bail was set at an astonishing $1 million, which was a price so high that it assured she would remain behind bars for years before any trial could happen. As they investigated Chrystul, detectives were gathering information about Volar. He lived alone in the cramped 360-square-foot one-bedroom house. He graduated from high school in 2001 and described himself as self-employed. He was 5 foot 8 inches tall and about 200 pounds. His autopsy showed he had been born with missing fingers and toes and a right leg shorter than the left. His parents divorced in 2009, and 3 years later, Volar wore a suit and a red rose boutonniere to be the best man for his father, Randall P. Volar Jr., when he remarried at a golf resort. After Volar was killed, homicide detectives quickly learned more about his activities. On the day of his death, police received a call from TCF Bank, where most of Volar's money, $800,000 in assets, was housed. Prosecutors would later say that Volar's funds came from legal trading in cryptocurrency. The bank, police reports show, suspected something else was going on. A bank official called the police to flag that between November 2017 and May 2018, Volar had almost $1.5 million in transfers. In a pattern of activity, the bank associated with human trafficking. From the beginning, Chrystul maintained that she had been a victim of systematic abuse at the hands of Volar, that he had trafficked her both for his own gratification and to other men, that he used drugs and manipulation to control her, and that in striking him down she was acting in a moment that was as much about survival as it was about escape. Supporters of Chrystul, including protest groups, sex trafficking survivors advocates, and national figures who rallied around her case. A petition to free Chrystul had circulated widely on social media, has received nearly 1 million signatures and hundreds of letters. Encouraging words, artwork, and books were even sent to her jail cell in Kenosha. The opening words on a fundraiser page started 4 years ago remains harrowing. "Hello, I am the mother of Chrystul Kizer, who was a minor at the time of her incarceration and is currently facing charges in Kenosha, WI, because she defended herself from a known sex trafficker, DeVore Taylor wrote. The page, which raised more than $67,000, a Facebook page urging authorities to free Chrystul, and a Wisconsin law that seemed to side with Kizer, wasn't enough to stop a judge from sentencing the Chrystul to more than a decade in prison for killing the man who allegedly sex trafficked her. They argued that Chrystul was not a cold-blooded murderer, but a victim whose act in context was an act of resistance against a system that failed her time and again. Chrystul's defense team sought to apply a rarely used Wisconsin statute, which was one that says victims of human trafficking can raise an affirmative defense for crimes committed as a direct result of their trafficking. In 2022, the Wisconsin Supreme Court shocked observers by ruling that Chrystul was entitled to present evidence of her trafficking under this affirmative defense. This effectively opened the door to a kind of self-defense argument that had never before been applied to a homicide case in the state. But even as the court recognized her right to a defense tied to her exploitation, the prosecution dug in, asserting that the law should not apply to violent crimes like homicide, that the evidence did not support her claim of imminent threat at the moment of the shooting, and that her actions were premeditated, pointing to messages she had sent to friends outlining her intent to steal the car, her movements before the killing, and the burning of the house afterward. All elements prosecutors argued were inconsistent with a narrative of self-defense. After spending nearly 6 years in jail and facing the very real possibility of life in prison, she entered a plea agreement for a reduced charge, second-degree reckless homicide, a decision that spared her a life sentence but resulted in an 11-year prison term. Kizer is currently incarcerated at the Taycheedah Correctional Institution. In handing down that sentence, the judge acknowledged the horrific abuse she endured at the hands of Volar, yet insisted that the violence she committed could not be excused entirely by the law. I think about all of the people who harmed Chrystul who are walking free today. There are individual men in southeastern Wisconsin who paid to sexually abuse Chrystul. They're walking free. Only Chrystul is being held responsible. Claudine O'Leary, an independent consultant for survivors of human trafficking with Rethink Resources, who worked with Kizer's defense team, said on the NPR show, "Wisconsin Today. Research shows that girls of color who are abused often end up in jail and are treated like criminals. On the other hand, white girls who are abused are usually seen as victims and get help from doctors or social workers. Black girls are often adultified, meaning people think they are less innocent and don't deserve as much help as white girls. This is a way of punishing them even when they are defending themselves." Before Chrystul's trial, people worried about how race would affect the case because it plays a huge part in sex trafficking. Black girls are trafficked at very high rates, even in places where there aren't many black people living there. While Volar was abusing Chrystul and selling her for sex, the police investigated him in early 2018. A 15-year-old girl called 911, saying a man was trying to kill her. She told the police she met Volar at a festival when she was 14, and he paid her $250 for sex. She spent a lot of time at his house. He gave her alcohol, weed, and eventually LSD, which gave her a scary experience. When she tried to call for help, she said Volar grabbed a gun, so she ran away. Later, the girl told police that Volar looked for young girls online and had many videos of himself having sex with children. The next day, police searched his house and found hundreds of videos, drugs, and needles. At least one video showed Volar with Chrystul. When he died, Volar was under investigation and facing many years in prison for child pornography and sexual assault. Cyntoia Brown Long was also a victim of trafficking. At 16, she was arrested for killing a man who paid her for sex. She says many adults look at trafficked kids and call them fast or promiscuous instead of seeing them as victims. "There is a stigma," she said. "You don't see them as victims." In 2006, Cyntoia was tried as an adult and given a life sentence. She was convicted of murder and robbery for killing 43-year-old Johnny Allen. She said she shot him because she thought he was reaching for a gun. Her case eventually led to new laws in Tennessee to protect kids who are trafficked. Cyntoia wrote a book about her life and her 15 years in prison. Her story went viral in 2016 when celebrities like Rihanna and Kim Kardashian supported her. In 2019, the governor of Tennessee let her out of prison early because she worked hard to change her life. While locked up, she finished high school and college and helped other young people who had been trafficked. Cyntoia's childhood was very similar to Chrystul's. Both grew up poor, were abused, and were trafficked by older, wealthy white men. Traffickers target vulnerable kids and trick them into thinking they have no other choice but to sell themselves and that nobody else cares about them. Because of racism, these kids have a harder time in court. They are treated like adults and blamed for what happened, while white kids are more likely to be seen as victims. In Chrystul's case, people ask why she spent more time in jail than Volar did. He was arrested in February 2018 for sex crimes against children, but was let out of jail the very same day. The cases of Chrystul and Cyntoia have brought more attention to this problem. However, thousands of people are still trafficked every year, and most of them are vulnerable, Black girls who are targeted and used. The case also raised difficult questions about redemption. Can someone who commits a violent act as a teenager, under circumstances shaped by exploitation, be allowed the possibility of healing? Or does the justice system by default prioritize punishment over rehabilitation, even when punishment perpetuates the cycle of harm?